Before we dive into this deep topic, I need to ask you a question that maybe no one has ever asked you so directly. Where was your father? At your birth, on your birthdays, during your biggest achievements, and your lowest moments? Was he present? Or was he just a distant shadow, a name on paper, an unresolved memory? Maybe he left early. Maybe he stayed, but was never really there. Maybe he was a constant silence in your story, or who knows, an absence that taught you more through his lack than his presence. Or maybe you don't even know exactly what to feel when you think of him. You just feel a strange emptiness you've never quite known how to fill. Either way, I want to invite you to do something. Before we continue here, subscribe to the channel, but not just for the content. Subscribe because this is a safe space made to touch wounds no one wants to face, but that need to be looked at directly. Here we think, feel, and build ourselves together. And more, leave your story with your father in the comments. Unfiltered, just as it is. It can be a memory, an absence, a letter never written, or just a sentence. Your words might resonate with someone who's also trying to understand their own silence. Sometimes your pain is similar to someone else's, who never had the courage to say it out loud. This video is for those who felt like something was missing, for those who had to learn alone what should have been taught, for those who heard little or almost nothing about how to be, and tried anyway. We're going to talk about philosophy, yes, but not the cold, distant kind made for dusty books. We're going to talk about a living philosophy, one that pierces the flesh, one that helps you name things you only felt but never knew how to explain. So get ready. Because what comes next isn't just content, it's a mirror. And sometimes it's a hug too. The idea isn't to give you all the answers, it's to spark questions that take you inward, closer to who you are and who you can become. Now we're ready. Let's go together. Growing up without a father isn't just an absence. It's a hole in the floor of childhood, a question that won't quiet down, a silence that screams from within. Some think it's just a matter of moving on, that time heals, that you just have to handle it. But what no one says is that the absence of a father isn't just any absence. It carries the weight of destiny, of a burden you carry without always knowing its name. It's looking in the mirror and not recognizing a piece of yourself. It's wondering who you would have been if that man had been there, not as a fleeting presence, but as a steady reference point. A father, after all, is more than a figure. He's a symbol of protection, direction, validation. And when that's missing, the world feels a bit more hostile, the heart a bit more uncertain, the path a bit more lonely. But that's where Stoicism comes in. This ancient philosophy, born among ruins and inner battles, has something brutally honest to say. It doesn't matter what happened to you. What matters is what you do with it. The absence of a father isn't something you can change. It's done. It's real. It's part of your story. But it doesn't have to define your destiny. The Stoics teach that we don't control our circumstances, but we always control how we respond to them. And that changes everything. Because in the middle of the absence, a space is born. And space, as strange as it may seem, is potential. It's raw material to build something new. What once seemed like a hole can become a foundation. So the question shifts. How do you turn absence into strength? How do you build a solid life without a paternal foundation? This is where Stoic philosophers become more than distant thinkers. They become allies, men who also faced abandonment, loss, silence, and still chose to cultivate within themselves what the world didn't give them. Maybe that's what life is asking of those who grew up without a father, not to pretend it doesn't hurt, but to learn to live with dignity, even so. Not to erase the absence, but to make sure it doesn't erase who you are. Epictetus was born a slave. His name wasn't even truly a name. It was more of a mark, a practical label, something that designated his condition, not his essence. He grew up without a known father, without real maternal support, without a family identity. And even with all of that, or maybe precisely because of it, he became one of the greatest thinkers of Stoicism. His life was the portrait of what many avoid facing, pain as the origin of freedom. Not physical freedom, because that was denied to him for much of his life, but inner freedom, the deepest kind of all. Epictetus understood early on that the external world could take almost everything from him, except the command over his own mind, over his actions, over the way he viewed life. That lesson, born from abandonment and humiliation, is a key for anyone who grew up without a father. Because it reveals that even when we were given no direction, we can still learn to walk with steadiness. And it's not an easy path. Being deprived of a father is, in a way, being thrown into the world without a manual. It's having to invent your own map. And that's exactly where Epictetus's philosophy shines like a beacon. He used to say, "It's not things that disturb us, but the judgments we make about them." In other words, it's not the abandonment itself that destroys us. It's how we interpret that abandonment. We can see ourselves as eternal victims, open wounds that never heal. Or we can use that pain as fuel for self-discipline, for self-knowledge, for building a firm existence even when everything shakes. Epictetus reminds us that no matter how much the world treats us as less, we have the right and the duty to treat ourselves as whole. And that wholeness doesn't come from someone affirming us, but from ourselves in solitude deciding to be. There's something almost sacred in that movement of taking hold of our own life when there was no one to guide it for us. Epictetus didn't become a master because he was embraced. He became a master because he chose not to sink. And it's that radical, courageous act of choosing that Stoicism offers to those who grew up with holes in their chest. Growing up without a father does mean growing up with cracks, but it also means discovering that cracks can be filled with gold if we have the courage to face the emptiness without running. Epictetus is the example that we don't need ideal conditions to achieve greatness. We need clarity, persistence, and a commitment to our own soul. Because in the end, no one can give back what we never had. But we can, with a rare kind of strength, build within ourselves everything that was denied to us. One of the most powerful, and at the same time most challenging ideas in Stoicism, is the distinction between what depends on us and what doesn't. Epictetus spoke of this as the beginning of wisdom. If you can separate what is in your hands from what isn't, then you can live with peace even in the midst of chaos. And growing up without a father doesn't depend on us. That's a reality that was already given to us, a marked card in the game of existence. The great trap is spending life trying to fix what is no longer within our reach, wanting the past to be different, wishing the father would come back, that time would return, that the story could be rewritten. But Stoicism invites us down a harder and more liberating path, to accept what was as part of the order of things, not as injustice but as destiny, and more, as raw material for the soul's work. Amor fati, that Latin expression later used by Nietzsche but born in the heart of Roman Stoicism, means to love one's fate, not tolerate it, love it. To have the courage to say, what happened to me was exactly what needed to happen for me to become who I can be. This isn't about denying the pain or romanticizing the absence. It's about understanding that within a cosmic view of life, every event has its reason for being. And yes, sometimes abandonment is the teacher. Absence is the mold. Emptiness is the push inward. Of course, this idea feels harsh, even cruel when you're in the middle of emotional need, when you feel in your body the coldness of not having been protected. But the Stoics push us forward, upward, inward. They say, if this is your story, then don't fight it. Make it your source of strength. There is a peace that is born when you understand that you no longer have to resist what already is. This acceptance, however, is not passive resignation. It's an active way of living in alignment with reality. The absence of a father doesn't have to be seen as a curse, but as part of your path, not as an obstacle, but as your starting configuration. And that's when philosophy turns into personal power, because once you stop fighting what was, energy is freed up to build what still can be. What is yours, your thoughts, your actions, your choices, begins to take up space. And what is not yours, the past, another man's decision not to be present, can be left where it always was, out of your reach. Resentment becomes learning, revolt becomes focus, the wound becomes fuel. Loving your fate doesn't mean finding beauty in what hurt. It means making pain an ally on the path to virtue. When there is no father, the world demands that we become adults before our time. It demands posture, maturity, decisions, without first offering a reliable mirror. Many grow up trying to find out what was missing at home. They try to mirror themselves in idols, leaders, authoritative figures, searching for a sense of direction. But the Stoics point somewhere else, inward. They tell us that true leadership, the kind that sustains an entire life, is the one that comes from within. And that leadership doesn't come out of nowhere. It's cultivated, day by day, through the practice of virtues, courage, wisdom, temperance, justice. The Stoic doesn't wait for someone to guide him. He commits to being his own guide, as if saying, since there was no one to hold my hand, I will learn to steady my own steps. And in that building process, a symbolic father figure begins to emerge, but now internal. A kind of firm voice that guides, embraces, and corrects. This internal figure isn't magical. It doesn't appear suddenly, like a ready-made substitute to fill the void. It is shaped over time by experience, by awareness, by the daily effort not to repeat destructive patterns. The Stoics taught that character is a person's true wealth, not the name, not the inheritance, not the blood ties, but the way one lives. And when you grow up without a father, character becomes even more vital, because it holds up the structure where, normally, the family foundation would be. Many who didn't have a father need to learn to confront themselves alone, to hold themselves accountable with balance, to offer themselves care without too much indulgence. And that requires a quiet strength, which looks a lot like the role a good father would play, not to protect from the world, but to prepare for it. Being your own father is perhaps one of the most challenging and noble tasks of adult life. More than just making up for the absence, this internal leadership transforms the story, because it's not just about compensating for pain, but about redirecting destiny. And when that happens, something surprising can emerge. The one who was left behind becomes a reference for others. The one who had no direction becomes a compass. Life then is no longer defined by what was missing, but by what was built from the lack. And that is one of Stoicism's great mysteries, the idea that virtue is always possible, even under the worst conditions. It's not about erasing the pain of absence. It's about making it fertile, giving it a place in the narrative without letting it take control. In the end, true leadership doesn't come from blood. It comes from choice, choosing to be what no one was for you, choosing not to repeat the abandonment, choosing to grow. Talking about a father's absence isn't just talking about structure. It's talking about affection, about the hug that never came, the scolding that was missed, the look of approval that never happened. Growing up without that is growing up with emotional holes that are hard to name. And here's where a lot of people misunderstand Stoicism, the idea that it tells you to suck it up. But that's not it. True Stoics didn't preach the denial of emotion. They preached mastery over it. Stoicism doesn't say you can't feel. It says you shouldn't be a hostage to what you feel. And that difference changes everything, because it allows the pain to exist without letting it take the wheel of your life. It's possible to feel sadness, anger, emptiness, and still act with wisdom. A Stoic isn't cold, he's steady. He acknowledges the hit, but doesn't break. And that, for someone who grew up vulnerable, can be liberating. But to reach that point, you have to face what hurts. And that takes courage. The courage to admit that a father's absence left marks, that we learned to defend ourselves too early, that maybe we became strong only because we had no other choice. And as strange as it may seem, Stoicism values this honest confrontation. Seneca, for example, said that no one is stronger than the one who knows his weaknesses and chooses not to be defined by them. Emotional balance doesn't come from pretending, it comes from self-knowledge. When we know where it hurts, it becomes easier not to project that pain onto everyone around us. It becomes easier to stop seeking in others what we can start building within. It's not about turning to stone, it's about not crumbling with every gust of wind, about finding a center. And for those who grew up without a foundation, that center can be the turning point, Being vulnerable and strong at the same time is almost a paradox, but that's exactly where maturity lives. Stoicism teaches us to walk that fine line, to feel what needs to be felt without letting it destroy us. Instead of hiding emotions, we learn to examine them, to understand where they come from, what they're trying to say, and from there, choose the wisest response, not the most impulsive. This process creates a kind of strength that isn't loud or aggressive. It's quiet, calm, deep. A strength that doesn't deny its own story, but integrates it. That doesn't feel shame about the lack, but turns it into a narrative. When someone manages to do that, the past stops being a burden. It becomes fertile ground, and what once was weakness becomes one of the greatest expressions of power, the power to feel without getting lost. Not everyone who's been wounded chooses to heal, and even fewer choose to heal others. Growing up without a father can lead someone to spend their life trying to fill an endless void, consumed by the idea that they need to recover what was lost. But Stoicism offers a different path, a higher one. It invites you to see the absence as an opportunity for contribution. The absence you suffered can become the presence you offer, and that changes everything, because instead of continuing to orbit around the pain, you begin to radiate meaning from it. The Stoics didn't see virtue as a luxury, but as a responsibility. If you learn something valuable through pain, then you have a duty to turn it into something useful for the world. That doesn't erase the suffering, but it redeems the existence. It makes the wound fertile. Because in the end, it's not just about what happened to you, but what you decide to do with it. Someone who was neglected can choose to become support. Someone who was ignored can learn to listen. Someone who was abandoned can become a steady presence, and that's one of the greatest legacies anyone can leave, breaking the cycle. If you grew up without a reference, you can become one. If no one lifted you up, you can be the outstretched hand for others. The Stoic understands that every human being is part of a greater rational community, and that living with integrity is not just a personal matter, but a collective one. The pain you don't pass on transforms. The absence you turn into something new becomes light. And that choice, not to take revenge on life but to respond with dignity, is one of the most powerful expressions of freedom a person can achieve. You may not have received everything you needed, but you can give the world something no one expects: wisdom, presence, virtue. This is not easy. It takes time. It takes effort. It requires looking inward with honesty and saying, "I was marked by a lack, but I am not only that lack." It takes courage not to repeat the abandonment, not to harden to the point of becoming absent yourself. And it takes vision, the ability to see a greater meaning, a mission that goes beyond your personal story. The Stoics believed that living well means living in accordance with nature, and that includes our ability to contribute to the whole, even, or especially, through pain. Legacy isn't what you leave behind when you die. It's what you generate while you're alive. And if your father's absence taught you something, maybe that something needs to be shared, because unprocessed pain becomes weight, but understood pain becomes direction, and the world, now more than ever, needs those who turn pain into path. There's a kind of silence that shapes you, the silence of someone who never said, "I'm here." The silence of someone who didn't explain, didn't protect, didn't guide. That silence at first hurts. It spreads through life like an echo that screams in decisions, in insecurities, in relationships. But there comes a moment, if the soul is paying attention, when that echo starts to change its tone. It begins to give way to a new voice, not one that comes from the outside, but from within. A voice that doesn't imitate anyone, that doesn't repeat patterns, that doesn't seek approval. It's the voice of conscience, the voice of choice. The voice that is born when a person understands that, even having grown up in the void of a paternal figure, they can become the author of their own story. And Stoicism is a radical call to that, to stop looking outside for what can and must be cultivated within. This inner voice doesn't appear all at once. It's built through practice, in the silence of hard decisions, in the honesty of recognizing your own mistakes, in the responsibility of staying steady when it would be easier to blame the past. The Stoics saw reason as a divine spark, a kind of inner guide that connects us to something greater. And when that reason is nurtured with virtue, with discipline, with clarity, it becomes a voice that guides without shouting, that corrects without punishing, that supports without deceiving. For those who grew up without a father, that voice can become the axis that was missing. And the most beautiful part of it all is that it doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be faithful. Faithful to principles, faithful to truth, faithful to the pursuit of a greater good. When that voice grows stronger, it begins to occupy the place of silence, not erasing the past but responding to it with integrity. In the end, what defines a life is not what was missing, it's what was done with the absence. Growing up without a father is, yes, a kind of emotional mutilation, but it's also a calling, to awaken, to mature, to find within yourself a strength that might never have emerged any other way. It's not about denying the pain, but about making it a portal. The silence left by the father doesn't have to be an eternal abyss. It can be the space where your own voice is born, a voice that not only guides your path, but, in time, can guide others. Because those who were wounded with awareness learn to care, and those who walked in the dark learn to light the way. A Stoic is not someone who had everything, but someone who decided, even with little, to live with everything they are. And that changes everything. Maybe what transforms us the most isn't what we received, but what we learned to do with what we lacked. Growing up without a father is an absence that echoes on many levels, in identity, in courage, in the way we love and allow ourselves to be loved. But Stoicism reminds us, with firmness and compassion, that we are not condemned to the story we inherited. We are called to write the one that's still missing. A father's absence may have left marks, but it also opened up space, a space where a new presence can be born, yours. Your awareness, your virtue, your ability to lead yourself, and maybe to offer the world what was once denied to you. And that's far more than resilience. It's transformation. It's when pain becomes direction and lack becomes voice. The world doesn't need more hardened people trying to prove they don't need anyone. It needs conscious people who know where they came from, but who choose, every day, where they're going. People who don't repeat absence but redefine it, who don't hide in resentment but walk with it in their pocket without letting it lead the way. If you carry the pain of growing up without a father, know this: you also carry the possibility of becoming something you may have never seen, a real presence, a living reference, an example of strength that doesn't deny vulnerability, but integrates it. And in the midst of all this, maybe, you'll light a way for someone who's walking today through the same darkness that once surrounded you. If this conversation touched you in any way, if at any point you felt like this content spoke directly to you, leave your thoughts in the comments. Share your experience, your story, or even a question that stayed with you. What you say here might help someone who is exactly where you once were. And if you want to keep walking this path of reflection, courage, and self-knowledge, subscribe here. This space is for that, for us to think together, feel together, and grow, even when we lacked someone by our side. Because sometimes it's precisely in the place of absence that our greatest value is born.